Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about our experience with a registry-based natural history study, which I hope others will find instructive and helpful as they perhaps engage in similar activities. So as Vilma said, I'm Teresa Strong. I'm Director of Research Programs at the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research. And I'm also, importantly, mom to a young man with Prader-Willi syndrome. So, oops. There we go. So I'll just say a word about PWS. This is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder that occurs spontaneously in about 1 in 15,000. So it's a rare disease. It affects males and females and all ethnicities and races pretty equally from what we can tell. And the reason for PWS has been defined now for, well, at least about 30 years. It's caused by loss of a set of genes on chromosome 15. And this is a very complex genetic region that has several different genes that make proteins, and then genes that just make RNAs. And so understanding exactly how the loss of those genes leads to the characteristics of PWS is still a work in progress. But we do have a definitive diagnostic test, and that's very helpful. So PWS has a lot of different features. So the major features in babies, they're oftentimes picked up because they're very weak and hypotonic when they're born, so kind of floppy, and they have feeding difficulties and may have failure to thrive. And over their childhood, however, that kind of shifts to where first they get a really intense interest in food, and eventually that progresses to hyperphagia, or food seeking and excessive appetite. So individuals with PWS will overeat all the time if they're allowed to. And so families usually resort to locking food up or keeping very strict routines around food to keep the individual at a healthier weight. There's a number of clinical problems as well. There's endocrine deficiencies, growth hormone deficiency. There's orthopedic problems, scoliosis, hip dysplasia, sleep disturbances, respiratory issues. So there's a lot of clinical things going on. And there's also a degree of intellectual disability, tends to be relatively mild, but also a behavioral phenotype. So behavior tends to include cognitive rigidity, a propensity towards temper outbursts, a lot of anxiety, so a lot of challenging behaviors for the person. And a high risk of developing mental illness as they enter young adulthood. So all to say that there's a lot of clinical things, there's a lot of behavioral things, all of which need attention and need understanding. And then a word about our organization. The Foundation for Prader-Willi Research was established in 2003, and it's that very typical origin story, I think, for many rare disorders. It was, a few moms getting together and seeing a need and then trying to fill that need. So in our case, there already existed the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, which does a lot of work in advocacy and education, among other things. But the group that came together for our purposes was really focused on advancing the research. So my background is as a geneticist. I got a PhD in genetics before I had kids and worked in academia. And the other parents who became involved early on in the foundation were also similarly interested in, how can we really advance the research and treatments for PWS? So that's reflected in our mission, which is to eliminate the challenges of PWS through the advancement of research and therapeutic development. And like many, rare disease organizations, for a long time, we were quite small and completely volunteer-led and run. But over the last 10 years, we've grown some, and we've developed a paid team. And that includes our first hire was Jessica Bahanowicz, who's half of her time was spent running our grant program, and the other half of her time was spent in registry development. We currently have 4 full-time and 1 part-time staff on our research team. So one of our important initiatives over the past few years has been the development and growth of the global PWS registry. And I think we're really fortunate in the rare disease space to have a lot of really excellent platforms on which to build registries. I know Genetic Alliance has the Peer platform, which has a lot of capabilities. There's the Sanford Research Chords platform. And in our case, our registry is through the National Organization for Rare Disorders, so NORD's I Am Rare platform. And I think NORD has 20 or 25 organizations now that are using that platform. We're, I think, one of the largest and one of the first to launch. So the goals of the registry as we developed it were to really better understand the full spectrum of Prader-Willi syndrome, kind of, the most severe cases, but also the cases that are doing well. Support and expedite the completion of clinical trials. When we started the registry, there really weren't too many clinical trials, or actually 0 clinical trials going on in the PWS space. We're now fortunate to have several clinical trials ongoing. We also felt like the registry would be good for helping us determine what are the areas of research that we need to focus on, what treatments, getting baseline data that would help support the development of treatments and guide standards of care, and ultimately, of course, to improve the quality of life of those affected by PWS. So our registry launched in 2015, and it's pretty comprehensive. I think there's actually a good argument to be made for keeping it kind of simple and focused. We didn't really do that, for better or worse. We had launched with about 35 different surveys. As I said, there's a lot of things going on in PWS. There's a lot of clinical problems, behavioral problems, mental health problems. And so we had surveys addressing, each of those issues. And, it's a lot of questions, and not every participant completes every survey. But in the end, I think, it works pretty well for us, because we do have, a good number of people who do all the surveys, which is great. Our launch and recruitment, we recruited a lot through social media. We went to national and local conferences. We always had the computer in hand so we could help people through the registration process, so that wouldn't be a barrier. Some other, tricks that I think that we did that worked well. We made a video that had like a step-by-step how to enroll, and, talked about the consent and the protocol. We developed a private Facebook group that and invited people to join. That way they could exchange if they had questions. We were there to answer them, but they could also kind of talk to each other about how they answered questions within the registry. And we really have tried to focus over the last several years on communicating the value back to the community at every chance we get, so that people really understand the importance of contributing their data and how that data is being used. So the registry has grown pretty nicely over the years. Right now we have about 2,000 individuals enrolled. And it's a global registry, although currently it's only in English. We hope to gain some additional languages here in the next year or so. So as I said, communicating back to the community is really important, and we have some very talented people that are associated with our foundation who help us develop these infographics that we try to send out every couple of months on a topic of interest. So we get together as a group and try to think of a topic of interest that has data in the registry, pull that data, and put out infographics to the community. We also do webinars and presentations at both family conferences and scientific conferences, and have recently tried to put some things out in the scientific literature as well. So that's shown here. I will say it has taken us a while to get to this point. So we launched the registry in 2014. Our first publication was in 2019. So it took a few years. And then since then, in the last year or so, it's really started to a lot of data has started to come out of the registry, some that we've done kind of in-house and some that we've done collaboratively with different academic groups. And really everything from, strabismus and eye problems in PWS to suicidality and neuropsychiatric features. So kind of covering the whole spectrum. And I'll say a word about governance. I'm not someone who likes the whole policy and governance thing, but it really is obviously very necessary, especially with the registry. So our protocol and consent, we tried to be really careful about specifying how the data will be used so that our participants really understand how their data is being used. We established an advisory board, which I think was really helpful to us. And that includes 2 academic researchers, so clinicians that are expert in PWS, 2 parents, 2 representatives from other patient groups. As I mentioned, our foundation is not the only advocacy group in the PWS space, so we make sure that we collaborate with other advocacy groups in our space. And then 1 individual from industry who's not currently working on PWS work. And this group has helped establish policies about, our procedures if we're going to recruit for clinical trials through the registry, how we're going to do data sharing, and if there's studies to run through the registry, they review and approve all of that. And we have established what we call registry rules. So basically, if a researcher, either an academic researcher or someone from industry, wants to put a new survey or project in the registry, then they have exclusive access to that data for a year. So that gives them time to run the study, get the data, publish the study ideally. But then after that, anyone can come in and use the data from their study. So there's this kind of, it's initially for their use, but then has to be used by the entire community. So we've had a lot of collaborations over the past few years, both again with industry and with academic groups developing endpoints for clinical trials, looking at different clinical aspects of PWS. And then what I'll spend the rest of the time discussing, which is our prospective natural history study that has been ongoing for the last 3.5 years. So this is the definition of a natural history study from the FDA guidance that was recently published. It's a pre-planned observational study to track the course of a disease. And the idea is to identify those factors, demographic, genetic, treatments, environment, that might influence the outcome of a disease or disorder. And they can be clinic-based, which is typically clinician-reported, registry-based, which oftentimes is patient or caregiver-reported, or some hybrid of that. So in our case, our natural history study is a registry-based, and it's all caregiver reported. This study is, as I mentioned, many of our patients have some degree of intellectual disability. So for this study, we're using caregiver reporting. And I'll give a quick overview and then kind of go into some of the details about its development and some of the bumps in the road as we went along. So this is a 4-year, it's a prospective study, it's non-interventional, and it is really focused on advancing the understanding of serious medical events that occur in PWS. So it's conducted through the registry. As I mentioned, we have about 2,000 participants in our registry, and this is a subset of that. It's done entirely remotely, and there are 2 components. One is a parent-reported retrospective medical history, so looking back on all the medical events that occurred before the time of enrollment. And then there's a prospective component where every 6 months, families or the caregiver fills out a report on any serious medical events that occurred, and I'll define that in a little bit. There's also a focus on thrombotic events because, as I'll explain, there's an increased risk in blood clots in PWS that wasn't appreciated a couple of years ago. We also asked families to do height and weight so we can monitor that, and then some behavioral assessments, including a hyperphagia or a measurement of excessive appetite, and then some measurements of some of the other behaviors that are common in PWS. And importantly, these are assessments that are also used in PWS clinical trials. So we have the assessments running through the registry in a large population, and it can serve as to help us understand what's going on in clinical trials. We also asked for current prescription medication use, and a part of the study that I won't really go into was to do a remote blood test to look at D-dimer, which is a laboratory measure of blood clots. So that was just a sub-study of the sub-study. So the backstory on this was that the concept for a natural history study of serious medical events was developed by Zafgen, which is a small biotech company. Zafgen had done a clinical trial in PWS, and they had developed a drug, beloranib. And they did a phase 3 clinical trial of beloranib, and it showed efficacy actually in reducing hunger in PWS, which was the first time any drug had shown an effect, and it was a strong effect. Unfortunately, however, the drug was associated with an increased risk in blood clots, and there were actually 2 fatalities that were associated with the clinical trial. So that drug couldn't move forward, but the company was interested in trying to develop a drug that had the same effect, obviously without the side effects. But what they realized, and what the entire community realized, I think, in the experience of the first clinical trial, is that we really didn't have a good understanding of what was sending individuals with PWS to the hospital, and what were the serious medical events that were occurring, and what is the frequency of those occurrences. And that's really important, obviously, to understand kind of the baseline of what is happening in a population, so that when a drug is added, you can have a better idea if it's due to the drug or just due to natural complications of the disorder. So Zafgen had an interest in doing a study to look at serious medical events. They talked to the FDA about it. We learned about it, and so this was 2018, so our registry existed and was in that early growth phase. And so we went to Zafgen and we said, look, Zafgen at the time was looking to do it through a contract research organization. So we proposed that it be run through our existing registry, and that would be good for them because we had a ready population, already recruited, and it would be good for us because it would build the registry as a resource for the community. So they liked that idea, and we formed a collaborative team with scientists from Zafgen and our team working together to build and execute this study. So the nice thing, of course, was that Zafgen financially supported the initiation of this study. They did they supported the marketing, upgrades to the platform that were necessary, the statistical analysis plan, the expertise that we didn't have. And we contributed to the study design, contributing the patient perspective. And we also hired a study coordinator that was supported financially by Zafgen, but was an employee of FPWR to run this study. And we partnered with other organizations in our space to recruit and raise awareness about the study. So again, the study objectives were to look at serious medical events, and this is the definition of what we were considering serious medical events, something that sent participants to an ER visit or an urgent care visit, for example. The secondary objectives were to look for blood clotting events and do this sub-study to a laboratory study for a marker for blood clots, look at prescription medication use, change in body mass index, and changes in behavior over time. So the basis of this was the global registry. There were some surveys that were already in the registry that were required for participants. And then there were some new surveys that were developed and added that were specific to this study. And we did encourage participants to complete all surveys within the registry as well, because there were some others that were not required. And we launched this study in October of 2018, and we were pretty aggressive in trying, again, going to family conferences, going to local, events to promote the study and recruit and, just talk about the study a lot. And it was very well received in the community. So our goal was to enroll 500, and we actually enrolled 700. And of those, about 650 completed all of the surveys and, the initial enrollment surveys. So some nice things for us on the registry side was this really helped increase our participation in older individuals. So up until this point, the registry had really skewed towards younger participants. So this allowed our demographic to shift and us to, enroll some of the individuals, adolescents and adults. So our lessons from the development and launch were that, we found it really important in our survey development and the question development to make sure that we were collaborating with key opinion leaders and getting the questions right so that we would get the best data out on the other side. Collaboration with other advocacy organizations like the Prader-Willi Syndrome Association, in our case, were really important to make sure that we're reaching everybody in our community. In this study, our participants had to consent to be contacted. So like many registry platforms, the NORD platform, you can check a box and say you don't want any contact. But for this study, we had to people had to let us contact them. And that's because we had a follow-up for every serious medical event where Lisa Mattisbach, who is the study coordinator, talked to the families and made sure the details were right. And so that was critical. And she's also great about reaching families the way they like to be reached, by text or by email or by a call, to remind them to complete the surveys on time, because they have to do that every 6 months. So she was the new hire, and it really, for us, emphasized the need to get the right person in the position. So Lisa had a clinical background. She's an audiologist, but she's also mom to a teenager with PWS, so she could really relate to families. She's really persistent, but she's very pleasant. And so she's able to get people to complete their surveys without being annoying. And I think that is reflected in the fact that we're 3.5 years into this study, and about 90% of the participants are still active, which is really, I think, a testament to her approach and our community. And another lesson from the initiation of the study is that I would never have suspected that there are people in this world who would pretend to have a life-threatening rare disease in order to get an Amazon gift card. But I can tell you there are a lot of people in this world who would. So we advertised on social media, and they were mainly private groups, but some of them were public groups. And what Lisa detected and what we realized was that somebody had gotten a hold and realized that if you completed all of the surveys, you got an Amazon gift card. And we had a number of, and by a number, I mean, over 100 fraudulent accounts set up. So just be aware of that if there's any mention of a gift card, you have to be really careful that whoever's enrolling, and it's a challenge in a remote study like this to verify that each person actually had PWS. So that was important. And then transparency and communication with the participants, obviously making sure that people are comfortable with how their data is being used, because there was a pharmaceutical company financially supporting this study. We wanted to be really clear about who had access to their data. The company never had access to the data. We had at FPWR, we had access to the data. We would share de-identified data with them, and making sure that everybody understands that and is comfortable with that was critical. And we also, we have a newsletter that goes out that shares data with families so that they can see how the data is being used. So just a little bit more, as the study progressed, we hit an unexpected bump, which was a pretty big bump, which was about 10 months into the study, and this is of a 4-year study. The drug development failed in preclinical testing, and Zafgen, the company that had been supporting this study financially, pulled out and was actually dissolved. And so it left us in a bit of a lurch. We had worked into our contract with Zafgen that if they had to pull out early, that they would give us, 6 months of financial support so we could, continue this study and find additional support. I was really glad that we put that in, and actually wish we had asked for a little bit more. We never expected that the company would have to pull out. But what we realized in that process, Zafgen was great to work with, but, of course, it's a for-profit company, and their financial obligation is to their investors. And so they did honor the contract, but not beyond the contract. They were also very generous in giving us, all of the marketing materials, transferring the sponsorship so that we could carry on the study. But, it did leave us in a financial situation that we didn't expect. So the expenses of the study, just so you have a ballpark, are about $200,000 a year, and that includes one full-time study coordinator, as well as there's others on our research team who contribute to the effort of this study, as well as the gift card. So every 6 months, our participants get a $50 Amazon gift card, and there's 600 participants, so it adds up, as well as some of the fees. So it's not an insignificant cost. FPWR took over the financial commitment because we could see the value of this study and how it would support all drug development, as well as giving us a better understanding of PWS in general. And it's currently supported by FPWR. We do have a clinical trials consortium that now has other participants, and that does underwrite some of the costs of the natural history study. So what have we learned so far in the study? Again, we're about a little over 3 years into a 4-year study. Lots of serious medical events in our population. We've documented more than 400 so far. About 40% of the participants have had some serious medical events. Mental health issues is highest, then GI issues, and then seizures, broken bones, and a variety of other things. So we're coding all of these in the same way that you code serious or adverse events in a clinical trial. So we'll have a good catalog of what is the baseline in our population. We also, as I mentioned, look at medication use, and what we can see is we knew there was a lot of behavior and psychiatric medication use in our population, and we have a better handle of that now. By the time our participants are over the age of 18, most of them are on at least one behavior or psychiatric medication, and many are on 2, 3, or 4. So understanding that and hopefully building some better standards of care around that is one of our goals. And then finally, we have had an opportunity to use the data, we hope, in support of a new drug application. That's an ongoing thing in a collaboration with Soleno Therapeutics. This is another company that is developing a different drug, diazoxide, for use in PWS, again, to address the hyperphagia or hunger, as well as some of the behavior issues in PWS. So this company did, a double-blind, placebo-controlled study of their drug versus placebo, and then all of those participants went into an open-label extension. And so we have been working with Soleno. Those participants have been on that open-label extension now for over a year, and so they are looking in conversations with the FDA, they're looking for supportive data to their phase 3 clinical trial. And so we have looked at the hyperphagia and behavior in the natural history study compared to the open label extension. So I'll just say a couple of words about that. So the comparison was the path for PWS participants who met the inclusion criteria for the open label extension of Soleno's study. And then we looked at the hyperphagia and other behaviors over the course of a year. And importantly, that analysis was performed by an independent CRO. So we submitted the data from the natural history study, Soleno submitted their data from the open label extension, and then the CRO compared the behavioral aspects. And that data has been presented elsewhere, so I won't present it here, except to say that it does show a highly significant improvements in hyperphagia in the individuals that are receiving the drug compared to the natural history, no intervention, and also showed improvements in some of the PWS-associated behaviors that we often see. So the sponsor, Soleno, is in discussions with the FDA about using that comparison as a supportive data for a new drug application. So we're hopeful that this PATH study actually started as the potential to support drug development for one drug in our space, but that the information could be used now hopefully for another, and in the future for additional studies in PWS. So our lessons from sort of the launch till now is that industry partners may abruptly leave your disease space, and you have to have contingency plans and be flexible about that, and just be aware of it. Secondly, our path for PWS cohort, that group of 600, 650 families, has really been a fantastic cohort. They're very engaged because they're doing this every 6 months. They've been a great group if we have other studies come along to kind of jump on the other studies. So I think there's a benefit to, just having kind of this ready group that is engaged in the research process. As far as, getting things completed, again, because it is remote, really targeted messaging with very specific asks and goals have worked really well in getting different surveys and research projects done. And finally, curating the data. So some of the data in this study is hand typed in by family members, and like the prescription medications and things like that. And that's great because that way we capture everything, but it presents its own problems as far as you would be amazed how many different spellings of drugs. So we have tried to be good as we go along, cleaning the data so that we can use it as effectively as possible. But that is a lot of very detailed work. So I will stop there. I've gone just a little bit over and see if there are questions or comments. And I can see a few in the chat. One question is, how much staff is it taking to manage and maintain the registry and the natural history study? I would say about 1.5 persons. So we have the study coordinator for the PATH, and that she does that 100%. And then Jessica also probably puts in 25%. And then we have another staff member who is very good at statistics, and she helps us analyze a lot of the data. So I would say 1.5 person. I see another question. What did you do to make sure they actually had the condition? And I guess this gets to the fraud thing. So detecting the fraud, it was a process, right? So we had contact information and addresses. And so Lisa would check every address. And sometimes the address would be like, if you Google mapped it, it would be like a warehouse or a strip mall or something, a Costco or something. And so that was the first clue. If the surveys were completed really quickly. You know, the NORD platform lets you see how long it took people to complete the surveys. Well, if they were completing surveys in a minute, you know, that was a clue that they weren't, you know, careful about it. We have, as the study has gone on, we have gotten proof from, I think we're up to about 80% of individuals now, either a lab test, diagnostic test uploaded, you know, that kind of thing. So we do have confirmed genetic diagnosis for the vast majority of participants now. And the other participants, I mean, the other fraud, like I said, it was really based on addresses, unreasonable answers to the surveys. And there were these sort of big spurts of people adding many, consenting many times. So you could kind of electronically detect it. I don't know if that answers that question or if anybody has additional questions about that. Yes, we are able to share the slides. Someone asked about sharing the slides. I think we'll share those. And how did you rule out overlap in those two sets, the one in the registry and the Soleno open label extension? We asked participants if they're enrolled in a clinical trial, and then we, all participants, and then we delete any data from when they're enrolled in a clinical trial. So there are a few clinical trials ongoing in our space, and we don't exclude participants. So we didn't want to get into a case where they enrolled in the natural history study and we said, oh, you can't enroll in any clinical trials, but we do exclude their data from any point that they are actively participating in a clinical trial. That's how we've managed that.
Feel free to unmute if you have any additional questions. I know we're going a little over, but go ahead, unmute and ask. And yes, we will share the recording after the processes with everybody. So if you joined late or those who weren't able to join today will get the recording.
And somebody else messaged me about the questions, whether they're, yes, no, pull down menus. We do that as much as possible because that makes the data analysis much easier. But for some things, we do have open text, including on some of the behavioral assessments. They're all, pull down or buttons, but then we have an open text so that people can comment. And that makes the data analysis more complicated, and we have to, we make sure that there's no identifying information in that, but it does add a lot of context. I think that is important. So it's a combination of the simple questions as well as some open text.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience with the study and the registry, actually.
Well, thank you.
And thank you all for joining. And as I mentioned, we will share the recording and it will be available on the Genetic Alliance website. If anyone has any more questions or additional questions, please feel free to reach out. All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.